Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Wright. I'm a chiropractic neurologist and I wanted to do a discussion on fascia. The title of this is going to be Let's Talk Fascia, No Longer Dismissed. We are currently at Georgia Chiropractic Neurology Center. This is our team led by Dr. Mark Ellis. We have a team of 7 doctors. I am the newest one on the field, been here maybe a little over a year now, and it's been a tremendous environment to work with. So a little bit about me. I have a bachelor's in kinesiology from Mississippi State University, and then I graduated with a doctorate in chiropractic from Life University, and I also hold the diplomate of the American Chiropractic Neurology Board. I was a research assistant in the College of Kinesiology at Mississippi State, and I'm also a founding member of the Myosynaptics Club at Life University. So to get started, I wanted to illustrate some importance about this concept of fascia, and I wanted to start with a bit of history. So fascia has never really gotten the notoriety that it's deserved. It's something that is in everyone's body, and it is truly amazing concept, but only recently has it ever gotten any recognition. So the inaugural Fascial Research Congress was hosted by the Harvard Medical School in 2007. The Fascia Research Congress is an institute that does research on fascia itself. They specialize in cadavers and understanding how the fascia works in the human body, and they give illustrations to people such as me and other researchers of how it can incorporate with treatments. Dr. Mark Ellis is a founding member of the Fascia Research Congress. So I was first introduced to this by him when I was shadowing here maybe 4 years ago, and I got to really understand how this thing works by watching him treat people and him talking about it. So to give you an idea of the notoriety that it's been lacking, in 1970 there was less than 100 known articles about fascia. Now a lot of people were doing articles on muscles or brain even, but not so much fascia. It was an overlooked concept. Now fast forward to 2005, there were 600 articles worldwide of fascia. It grew, let's say 6 times what it was, but that's 35-year difference. Now, if you just go a little bit further into 2007, when the Fascia Congress was first initiated, that spiked to between 2007 and 2015, there was 10,500 articles, and it was in over 19 languages. Now, what that means is this took the world by storm. Fascia became this concept of we need to know what it's doing. It's no longer being overlooked. Many scientists and researchers and clinicians alike were really fascinated with this idea. So the research started to just quadruple, really. And it was quite amazing. So now we're 2025. I couldn't quite find how many research articles there are, but the research is tremendous. So let's get into it. So what is fascia? Well, I found a really good definition that I think I'd like to share, and it's think of fascia as a kind of internal scaffolding or a 3D dimensional spider web that holds everything in place and allows for smooth movement and interaction between different body parts. And as you can see here, I have this image of where it's skin. It's a layer after layer. So you have skin, like the cutaneous thing right here that you can see and feel. And then under it, you have this layer of fat cells called adipose. And under that, you have fascia. And then you have fat cells again, and then fascia, and then muscle and fascia. So it kind of does this all-encompassing, enveloping thing. I like to make an analogy of saran wrap. And I like to do it with, say, a cheeseburger. So if you take a cheeseburger and you have the bun and you have the lettuce and the tomato and the burger, well, these are analogous to all the different parts of your body. And if you take that saran wrap and you say, put it on top of the bun, and then you put it on top of the lettuce and put it on top of the tomato and so on, and then you wrap it together, well, all of that's held together by this clear plastic kind of sticky adhesive thing. And that's kind of an analogy I like to use for fascia because that's what's happening in our bodies. But it's so much more than that. It has this genius design that allows for the muscles to move and the blood vessels to move and all of those things to kind of operate together with a synchronicity and it's truly amazing. So I'd like to start with a little anatomy with that. So there's this thing called biotensegrity, and biotensegrity is this idea that everything's interconnected, and it's really cool. So the connection of the fascia goes to every layer. So if you take that original thing of like the burger, right, and then each layer has a different piece of saran wrap. Well, in the body it works a little bit better than that. So if you go skin, and then you say have fascia, and then you go fat, you have fascia, muscle, fascia. It keeps going down each layer all the way down to the cellular level. There's a thing called an extracellular matrix, and people tend to know about it if it's related to like a sodium-potassium pump, or maybe the mitochondria, which is like the powerhouse of the cell. So it has this interconnectedness down to the smallest level and degree in the body. And it can have tremendous implications to how the fascia interacts with us as humans and how treatments can go. So I wanted to start with force transmission. So muscles tend to be a really powerful thing that we all like to talk about. Well, force transmission is kind of the idea of that. If I wanted to, say, pick up this glass of water, I had to transmit a bit of force in order to do it because there is a subsequent weight to it. So you have these things called myofascial chains of continuity, and they allow interactions between various different muscles. So let's take the first individual running up the steps. So in order for this individual to run up the steps, they have to be able to activate one arm this way and then an opposing leg this way, and then the arm to go this way and the opposing leg. So you have to do this kind of walking mechanism. Well, in order to do it, you're activating and deactivating two sides of a body, which seems a little bit antiquated because we already know that happens. But when you look at what's really happening there, is your fascial connectivity is interacting with different muscles on the left or the right, ones that oppose each other, ones that facilitate each other, and it's allowing this perfect chain of continuity to allow it to smoothly glide and smoothly operate. And then if you'll take this other individual who's doing quite a powerful lift, in order to do this, you have to have this amazing pressurization in order to lift it, and you have to be able to balance with your center of pressure and center of gravity, which takes a lot of the front force of your musculature and the posterior side of your musculature, and they have to work in this beautiful synchronicity of alignment in order to allow it to happen. And this happens through force transmission through fascial chains. And I'd like to demonstrate that a little further. So I titled this one Interconnectedness because, as you can see on here, it starts with a bone and it goes to a tendon and then the muscle. And then as you go through, you have the muscle individual pieces. And then it goes down to the itty bitty muscle fiber. Well, each of those, if you can look at it, has this little colored cylinder across it. Well, it's because every one of those are encapsulated by its own form of fascia. So for instance, you have the first one that is the epimysium, and that is surrounding the muscle itself, let's say a bicep. Then you have the perimysium, which is, it's a bundle of muscle fibers, and it's got its own separate encapsulation of fascia, separate from the original one across the whole muscle. Kind of like the saran wrap analogy, right? And then you go down a layer further and you have the muscle fiber, the individual piece has its own wrapping again, which gets into that idea of the extracellular matrix and this concept of fractals, meaning it's the tiniest little cellular aspect all the way to the largest aspect. And then I wanted to illustrate the new thinking of fascia. So people used to think tendons and ligaments were these separate things, but they're not. If you look at this image and you go from the muscle fiber, the little tube, to the medium tube, and then it goes to the bigger one, and then to that tendon, all the way to the bone. Well, what that is it's each of those individual fascial layers from each individual section is combining to make a tendon. That way they all work together properly. So it's an antiquated idea that tendons and ligaments are these separate things. They're not. They're actually a elongation, if you will, of the fascia itself, which is really, really cool. So there's an interconnectedness from the feet to the top of the head. So this is an image from Anatomy Trains by Tom Myers. And in this image, it kind of illustrates the musculature of the entire back, going from the bottom of the feet all the way up to the top of the head. So just a little tidbit on this is like sometimes you can have, say, calf pain or pain in your hamstrings, the back of your legs, and you'll represent it as pain in your head because you don't realize, but the way that the fascia pulls and then operates with the muscle, it can correlate with a referral to that area. And realistically, the only way you know it is if you have trained this way and have knowledge of anatomy, but we do that. Speaking of, I wanted to talk about postural imbalance and compensation. So there's a neurological feedback when you have, say, fascial constraints. So if you have, let's say, bad posture. Let's say that you're leaning forward and your shoulders are down and you have this really tight back and you have, like, say, shoulder pain or upper back pain. Well, what's happening is you're having this brain interaction with the fascia that's essentially pulling it down and tightening, causing this pain receptor activation. And this is something that we can work on through, say, myofascial treatment and kind of correct it with a little bit of brain rehabilitation. And then with this imbalance, you can have this hypertonicity of muscles. And then, so if I were to illustrate that, I would say if I was pulled down, the muscles of my chest, my pectoralis muscles, could be a little hypertonic or tight, to say otherwise. And those could actually pull me down, and it could stretch the back of me, and it could cause the top of my head to hurt because of the previous illustration that we did about how all of that's interconnected on the back, because I'm showing you the back of this, but realistically it's the full body. And then understanding it allows for the understanding and comprehension of how that interacts with different pain receptors. So in the fascia, there's numerous amounts of proprioception, and proprioception essentially is this feedback to the brain. It's like, it's a little guy talking, saying, hey, this is what's going on, just letting you know. And the brain makes decisions based on that. So the fascia contains more than 250 million free nerve endings, which is actually more than the skin. And that previously thought the skin was the largest organ and the most innervated organ, and that's not true. In actuality, the fascia is by far and large the largest organ in the body, and it encapsulates everything. And it has the most proprioceptive receptors there is. Then there's mechanoreceptors, so that's like physical touch or stretch. So if you were to do therapy and maybe get a massage, or you do myofascial treatment, or even a light touch, you're activating mechanoreceptors. And these allow for interpretation of, say, you're touching me, or I feel that physically. And then you have proprioceptors. There's numerous kinds. So that's kind of just the feedback of information to the brain. You have ones that will feedback like the lightness of a feather or the heaviness of a phone dropping on your toe. Okay? And then you have thermoreceptors. These detect heat, which is a really good thing. So if you get in, the shower and it's a little hot, you're going to know it. Because if you didn't, that's not fun. Chemoreceptors are going to be the next one. So that's going to kind of identify things for you, like, say, sweet or sour taste, or maybe you taste something bitter and you don't like it. Some people don't like black coffee. This is telling you that. Then lastly, you have nociceptors, which are pain detectors. This is by far and large the most commonly known one because people feel pain and people don't like pain. But the fascia is highly innervated with nociceptors. So they are highly innervated with pain receptors to tell your body what's going on. Now, speaking of fascia, I wanted to get into an important topic on it, which is called the adhesion process. Now, the adhesion is kind of like, let's say, glue or plaster for a wall. It's an adhesive that combines and sticks things together. It's essentially super glue. So the first image on here is a normal muscle fiber. It's nice and striated and it looks good. Well, let's say that it has a slight injury, maybe an overuse. You have like a tiny little tear, nothing of note, but it can happen. Now, when that happens, your body wants to rebuild and heal. So it does an adhesion formation as a start, which is a completely natural healing process. So it begins to go in there and it gunks all this up with this soft connective tissue, and it acts as an adhesive to pull it together. The same as if you were to go to a doctor and they were to use sutures on your arm if you had a cut to pull it back together to allow it to heal. Your body has that natural process. Now, if you can see at the end here, the adhese muscle, it looks as if someone had put glue on it to stick it together. Now, this is a natural process, okay? So what is supposed to happen if everything is perfect is that when you get an injury, then the adhesion goes and it sticks it together, pulls everything together, it heals, and then you have these little cells that come in and it'll eat all of that adhesion off and take it away, and it's a happy place. But sometimes, due to various reasons, it doesn't take it away, and then you can have pain or disruptions to your sensory system or whatever because it's still there. Now, one of the things that can come out of this adhesion process, let's say if it's still there, you can have headaches and feelings of tension. It's a very common one. So, adhesions can be embedded in muscles, as I showed you before, and it can influence pain receptors, as we talked about with the nociceptors, that can induce headaches. So what happens is you have a little piece in your muscle called a muscle spindle, which is embedded in the muscle fiber. It's this really, really tiny part of the muscle that tells the body info about if it's being stretched or not stretched. Well, when you have an adhesion that's glued to something, it can do this tug of war, okay? And it can add a little bit of stretch to it. And then when it adds the stretch, it makes the muscle spindle give info back to the brain about what's happening with the muscle. And then when you do it enough, you can have pain. Typically it's chronic pain if it's a migraine, and it can be due to areas in the muscles or various other regions. And feelings of tension can also be there, say in the shoulders or neck, because if you're having this feeling of stretch constantly pulling on you, stretching you back, then you're going to feel it. Sometimes it can be followed with a headache, other times not. You just feel this dull strain. And that could be fascial adhesions that weren't properly taken care of, and they're just embedded in the muscle and they're stuck there. Proprioception and balance. That's a big one with fascia. So people can have these balance abnormalities because it can be due to, say, that tug-of-war mechanism. Say if the adhesion, that's a little bit of a glue thing, is pulling on something and you're trying to move your muscle, it's fighting the other one. So it's like it's doing this. So maybe you're going to have this sway because you're trying to over-pull it and it stretches it, and then you get pulled back or left or right. So when you are looking at it from a fascial standpoint, the proprioceptive receptors are very important to understand from a neurological lens so that it can be treated. The next would be chronic pain and trigger points. Now, trigger points are very common, especially with headaches, or back pain. Now, trigger points are something that we commonly check in the office. So, for instance, a SEM, this big muscle on your neck right here that allows your head to turn, this is a very common one to check and can refer up to your head and give you pain. Not a lot of people tend to check this one, and then you just go in there, you can understand how the adhesions work in the muscle, work out the trigger point through a little soft tissue work, and really change pain for people. It's quite dramatic. Long-term fatigue muscles can be a thing too, due to that stretched receptor base from an adhesion. So if it's chronically stretched, the muscle gets tired, and when it gets tired, it tightens up really hard as a latch-ditch effort. It's almost like a rope. It tightens up to a rope, and when it does that, it's just tired and it's full of pain, and it's basically trying to stabilize you, but it's tired, so it's going to hurt. It's your body's way of telling you, hey, can you help out this muscle? Then when you look at the fascia, what it can do with that chronicness is it can tighten up and make thick bands of fascial adhesions over it to help stabilize it. And again, it's a natural process. It's beneficial to your body to have that. However, if it's there for a long term, then it can cause pain. And you want to have someone go in there and understand it so that they can fix it. Next would be nerve compression or sensory disturbances. So tightness of the fascia tends to surround the nerves. So the way it kind of should work is it should work like you have these little tubes like wire or let's say straw. And then if you have like like this wrapping around the straw, the straw should move in and out of the wrapping just fine. But if it doesn't, then it gets compressed and it gets stuck. And when it gets stuck, it doesn't move properly. And then you can have these sensory disturbances. So with the reduced gliding mechanism, you lose body awareness, which can be a problem, whether it's with posture or it's balance, even vertigo. So an example of this would be feelings of suboccipital neuralgia. Now, this has historically been treated with ablation therapy, which essentially is burning of the nerve. And when it's not been treated with that, it's been cutting of the fascia to cut the nerve itself. Now, here at GCNC, we do not do that. We practice constantly with precision of our hands, and we can treat things like suboccipital neuralgia non-invasively, and we are quite successful with that. So I wanted to give you an idea of a patient. So this is a patient of mine that came into the clinic not too long ago. Patient M comes in the office with complaints of forgetful memory and bouts of disassociation. And that is like staring off, losing track of what's going on. You're just blanking in the space. Now, as we're working on the case and improving symptoms, another symptom's brought to our attention. And that was headaches and dizziness. So he had feelings of unsteadiness and dizziness. And it became more apparent as we worked because we were reducing the other symptoms. And then he was, well, if you can get this one better, can you get this other symptom better? To which we moved on and we tried to do that one. Well, as we were going, we realized that he had, through a little history, realized that he had broken one of his ankles, twice, no less. And one of them, he actually was trying to lift up a large amount of weight. And during that event, he had snapped his ankle, which is not a normal cause. So through palpating and feeling that ankle scar tissue, he actually had the feeling of dizziness and unsteadiness replicated while he was laying on the table. So that fascial adhesion that was going through the bone actually replicated his dizziness. And then, of course, we worked on it with soft tissue work, and he was much, much better afterwards. Now, I wanted to relate another patient. So this was someone that had migraine-related pain. And we were doing a lot of neurological rehabilitation, but in this office, we don't throw anything out. So this patient was sent to me to do fascia work on. And they had a lot of neck pain and migrainous pain. When I first saw them, they were at 7 out of 10 constantly. And they had these little neck movements that they just weren't happy with. She was using Botox at first. I think she had 3 bouts of Botox, and it just wasn't helping. She kept going back because she thought maybe it'll help, and it just never did. So after that, we started doing myofascial treatment of her neck, and we reduced her pain from a 7 out of 10 constant to a moderate to constant 4 out of 10. And then when she came back for her last visit, she actually reduced over a little bit of the healing to a 2 out of 10. She still had a little bit. So as we were looking, she had a little stiffness in her ear. And she had a fascial adhesion on a piece of her ear, funny enough. To which we got it off, and that 2 out of 10 pain went away. It was really incredible. It was the fascial adhesion that caused a stiffness in the ear, probably interacted with the nerve, and it was referring up to a headache pain. This is a very, very cool case. So this is some of the treatments we do in the office. So this is me performing a myofascial treatment of the neck. So one of the things we can do is we can go in and understand and isolate different parts of muscles and understand how they are adhesed together and how they glide, and we can go, let's say, manipulate them in order to change how they interact with one another so that you can reduce pain. You can move your neck easier, reduce things like dizziness, for instance. One of the things you can do with this is trigger point therapy. So it's kind of that idea of the muscle fiber having this embedded adhesion, and then you go in there, and then when you can isolate it and understand it, you can take it out with your hands and actually reduce that pain, that person's pain, more often than not, to 0. There are neuromuscular activation and defacilitation parts of this. So As we'll go on further, you'll see that individuals will oftentimes do this movement of they turning their head left and right while looking at a target. And that activates particular brain centers. And one of the ways that we find very beneficial to help these individuals are doing these really soft movements. So muscle weakness and poor recovery can also be a consequence of having poor fascial integration. So as I mentioned before, mechanical restriction and impaired gliding can come from this. So if you're wanting to, say, move your arm, but if you have adhesions that are built up in a little bit of a bundle, then it's going to be a little bit stiff and not so easy to move. Now, under most circumstances, your brain should override that and you can do it anyways. And you won't notice the tightness. You won't care. But under the circumstances that it's too much or that your brain needs a little bit of like a little boost, then you're going to notice it. Some people notice their shoulder getting really stiff and it just doesn't move well. And I have an example of this. So first let's talk about the rotator cuff. The rotator cuff allows for this rotational motion. And there's four, let's say, principal muscles that tend to do it. You have your supraspinatus, your infraspinatus, your teres minor, and your subscapularis. Now these are standard muscles that I tend to check whenever I'm looking at someone moving their shoulder. And there are other related ones, serratus anterior, the lats. And we tend to check all of those, but they give us an understanding of how movement is occurring for the individual. So here's a case review of a college tennis player I had. This individual presented with a tight right shoulder, which caused him pain upon movement, which you can understand as a problem because he's out trying to play tennis. He's trying to hit the ball. It's not going so well. He had seen other practitioners that were doing soft tissue work, and he was not having good results. He suspected he had a tear, and then I believe he went and checked it out, and he had no tear. So he came to us, wanted us to figure it out off a referral, and at first glance, it seemed like a clear-cut soft tissue treatment. But as we continued along, we understood that the soft tissue was actually negative at first, and we had to retract and change up and do a neurological rehabilitation first, which was to some degree, indirect way, but realistically a direct way of moving this individual's arm. And through some complex movements, like you move your arm in this figure 8 pattern, which seems a little goofy, but it works quite well, and a little bit of these eye movements, his arm started to move quite freely, actually. And after doing that, we could get in there and do the soft tissue, and we could change up the proprioceptive activity and allow his arm to move freely. Now, I wanted to put this one in there to illustrate the importance of understanding how the fascial and soft tissue system works, because it's not always cut and dry, go in and rub the shoulders better. It's not always how it works. So when you're looking at these kind of problems, you want to have someone that understands when to do it and when not to do it. Now, this is a patient of ours. This is me. I'm treating this individual. This is just a standard myofascial treatment we do here. And this individual is a marathon runner. And he showed up and he wanted to have improvements in his marathon time. Well, we were able to cut off about 7 minutes off his marathon time, which was quite good. And what I'm doing here is I'm grabbing this muscle under his foot called the flexor hallucis longus, and I'm also grabbing under his hamstring on the same leg. Now, through the understanding of the anatomy, I understand that the muscle of the toe is the first thing to hit when running, and then it travels up the leg all the way to the hamstring, and there's an interconnectedness of this. And then by treating it simultaneously, we can change up the reactivity of how this individual runs. And the proof's in the pudding. It worked out quite well, and I think he was quite happy with the results, and so are we. Now, this is our lovely Dr. Hose. She is doing gaze stability with fascia. So gaze stability is when you turn the head while looking at a dot. It works a particular reflex that is integrated, particularly with balance and head movements. And when we do these, we want to be able to operate it off these little receptors and these skin pools in order to properly turn a head, and it will integrate and calibrate an individual's neck muscles, which will change up numerous things. It's very, very good therapy to do. Next, we have visceral manipulation with POTS. Now, for those of you that don't understand what POTS is, it's postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Typically, it's when someone is lying down and they stand up, and then there's alterations in their autonomic nervous system, such as their heart rate jumps up way too high, or they get really lightheaded and potentially faint. And then visceral manipulation has great impacts on it. So one of the things that we tend to do is we go in through the belly system, and there's organs there, and then we can operate with our hands and move and manipulate the organ system and the fascia connecting it, and it will alter nerves and it will alter autonomic nervous system responses. And it's quite a powerful tool to use in therapy. Next, we have fascial gliding for arm movement. The fascial gliding for arm movement is really interesting. So, for instance, one of the things that we do is this little move of where we'll just slide across, and it gives someone enough feedback to move their arm from a neurological component because it's a light little touch. But that little touch can allow someone to move properly because you're innervating and activating this muscular system off of this light touch, which has a tremendous impact on their brain. And when you are working with someone's brain, that's really how you get stuff done. It's quite wonderful. Now, I wanted to show you guys this video to illustrate essentially what I've been talking about with fascial adhesions and their implications on daily life, whether or not it bothers you.
Shoulder deal.
So this is an individual. He's an athlete.
Cool.
As you can see, he can move his arm just fine. Has no problem with it.
Good.
Left to right, moves it all fine.
Now can you
This is
do what you
Dr.
did a
Mark
second
Ellis,
ago?
by the way, demonstrating this. So this individual is going to go here and find an adhesion and shut this man's arm down. When she holds the adhesion, he can no longer pull his arm.
See if you find
So
more
he has
spots
this
that shut it
embedded in the
down.
muscle
So
tissue,
she's-
but he
yeah,
doesn't
shut it
normally
down.
care nor notice it because his brain can override it. However,
Turn
she
another
is
one.
essentially
Feel it
exacerbating
first,
this a
let
little
him
bit
go,
by
and
holding
feel him
it.
move.
Not
Ready?
even
Feel him move.
hard, by the way.
Okay.
Now this is
Now go
something
find
that
one.
if you're, say, a professional athlete, or let's say if it gets a little worse and
That
your
did
shoulder
make it a
doesn't
little
quite
harder in
move
his
the way
head
you want it
trauma.
to, this
Well,
is
try
something
one
we
way
can
up
go
and his
into
armpit further
and
out.
use fascial treatments to completely change and alter and get, say for instance, this individual's arm motion fully back.
Nice. Okay. That's a good line. Shoulder deal. Okay. Cool. You see it? Let's see.
Thank you for listening to my fascia talk at Georgia Chiropractic Neurology Center. If you have any questions, contact the office for a complimentary consultation. The number is at the bottom, and you can also send us an email. Thank you so much.